Welcome back to the Own Your Awkward podcast. I'm your host, Andy Vargo, and every episode we get into what has made our guests vulnerable and how they've learned how to own their awkward in order to live their best life. Stay tuned so you can hear every awkward moment in today's show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Own Your Awkward. I'm your host, Andy Vargo, and today we have Joseph Theis. Joe, how are you today?
Hello, I'm good. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great, and in all awkwardness, I have never heard you say your name out loud. Did I say it right?
It's Theis.
Theis. See,
Yes.
I thought that as soon as I was like, that's the one thing I usually ask my guests right before we start the show. But we're all about being awkward. So please welcome Joseph Theis to our show. Joe just wrote an awesome book, which I have on the way in the mail. I can't wait to read it, called Salem Avenue. And that's exciting. I don't want to steal any of your thunder, but Joseph is a budding author, soon to be top selling. So you guys are going to help by buying his book as soon as you listen to this episode. So check the link below for that option to buy it and learn more. So Joe, how are you doing? What do you have going on exciting? Tell us about your book. Tell us about what you have going on so people can know a little bit more about who you are than what I just butchered with your name.
Yeah. So my book is really the main thing that's happening in my life right now. It's been a long time coming. It's been a project I've been working on for 4 years, off and on. It is called Salem Avenue. I wrote it through this program at Georgetown University. It was a great experience that I got invited to join this program while I was finishing up law school. And so the professor who runs the program, he really wanted to expand the program beyond just Georgetown, reach out to other students in the DC area. And so he told me about the program, and it was something that I really had wanted to do to finish this book. So the whole program was focused around, kind of creating this product, in the program's case, a book, and then kind of learning how to market it yourself. And so I'd had this idea for this collection of horror stories, just kind of ruminating in my head for years. So I was like, this is great. I'm almost finished up with law school. This is a great time to just kind of buckle down and finish up this project that I've been working on, for so long. And so it gave me a great opportunity to really sit down, focus on this book and finish it. And I'm so happy with the program and the way that it's turned out. And with the pandemic, it really gave me an opportunity to, just focus so much on writing and kind of reflecting on where the world is right now. Especially, taking a lot of inspiration from the horrors that, we're seeing, the isolation, and living in DC, I got a lot of inspiration. Just, this is the first city I've really lived in. So much of the book is really taken from my experiences living in DC, in the city during this time of self-isolation and in a pandemic. So each story really looks at different aspects of isolation, of living in a city. A lot of it is very much inspired by, the pavement, just the atmosphere, the ambiance of just a silent, kind of fallen city. A lot of urban decay definitely runs throughout the book.
There's a couple things you mentioned there that I want to make sure we touch on. One is that how you worded it, that the pandemic gave you this opportunity, which is such a beautiful thing. I think people need to be looking for, if they haven't already, is there's so many great things that come out of trying times. And, for you, it was the ability to finish this book or reflect differently on it. And one thing that really hit home is when you're talking about being in a city that's isolated. You're in a city where you're used to being surrounded by people, and that's life, and it's busy and hectic and crazy and crowded and the hustle and bustle. And then all of a sudden the world is shut down, and you're, I in Tacoma here, I live in a city, and I'm downtown a lot. And during the pandemic, I would be downtown and there's nobody there. Parking is empty. You'd see a car randomly every hour just kind of stroll past, almost kind of looking like they're driving to a war zone, going, what happened here?
No, exactly.
And it's such an eerie feeling. And I think for a horror story, that's the perfect setting.
It really is. And it really, like you said, it did give me the opportunity, but it really gave me a lot of inspiration and a way to really hone in on, okay, what's a theme that I can go for to really unify this collection. Because I'd had several stories that I'd wanted to include in here, and they each kind of ended up being longer than, you know, a book could sustain. I had at one time, you know, 13 different stories that could all be, you know, hundreds of pages long. And it got to the point that like, I can't include all of these in one single book. So
right.
it really came down to, so it really came down to what's a way to, you know, choose the best stories that all fit a good theme. And the pandemic really helped me, you know, select which stories really speak to what's happening right now.
Yeah. And those other stories can be in a later book. And
yeah,
I feel like as an author, when you have these topics or these stories that you're writing about, and when you pull them together in a collection or a book, you get to that point where it's kind of like, which child do you let go of? You know, it's like, oh, I love these all so much. I don't know if you felt that way with the stories.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's so many stories that I couldn't include in this one that I have outlines for. I already have character names. I know how they're going to end. But it's really like, I really want to write that story, but I just can't write it yet, because that's going to be, you know, in a later book that I already have planned out, already have outlines for. But I mean, they are very much like your own children, you know, and I've heard artists say that so many times, whether it's singers talking about their songs and albums, or whether it is authors, you know, it really is that feeling. And I didn't necessarily expect that, because this is also really the first, you know, project that I've completed. So you really get a sense of, you know, ownership over it.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I love the title too, by the way, Salem Avenue, because that brings so much imagery in, and just the name Salem kind of is a haunting name. I mean, you obviously put a lot of thought into that, but have you shown us the cover yet? We got to make sure everybody sees the cover of this book. Just take a second, check that out. Look at that hand. That kind of creeps you out right there.
Yeah, and that is actually my hand.
Did you get that cured by now, I hope?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So I'm very much, you know, a visual person. So I've always kind of had, you know, covers in mind when I'm writing, and titles too. I really have an idea of the finished product before I even start, you know, actually sitting down and writing it. And so for the cover, I'd already had ideas in my mind. And so one night I'd set up my own sort of photo shoot at home, just to use for like marketing material and for Instagram posts and stuff like that. So I'd set up, you know, different, you know, scenes that I was going to take photos of. And, you know, it comes from the first story where there's this black spot, and that's the title of it, The Black Spot. That's the first story. And there's this black spot of mold that kind of infects the main character's apartment, and it infects his hand. So I took, it's this bamboo face mask, bamboo and charcoal, and I just like applied it to my hand. And then I added some ground pepper to add some like texture to it. And I like spread that out with a toothpick, very like painterly, and like made it look just right. Put that down on the counter, took a picture. I didn't even like intend for that to be the final image. I took some other ones. And then eventually when we got to the cover designers in the program at Georgetown, I sent them some of the other images that I took, but they weren't, you know, they weren't high quality enough, or they were too far away, or there were some other things. So I sent them this image, and they were like, oh my gosh, that's perfect. That's a great creepy sort of, you know, vague, but also very detailed image to put on the cover. So they were really happy with it. I was really happy.
Hearing that story, because I totally thought that was a picture of a hand that had been photoshopped to have the spot on it. Like, I mean, hearing that is awesome. And I had pre-ordered Joe's book, and it was fun to see the iterations of the cover design. You had the one with the window and the kind of city line in the background, and this was my favorite. I loved the hand. I just thought it gave me a sense. It was very subtle and plain, but it told you right away that the book is going to be a horror story.
Yeah, and I do love minimalist designs on covers. So I really wanted to just leave it up to the reader to see that image and let that image really stand on its own.
Yeah, I love that. So, Joe, as you know, I ask everybody what their awkward is they've had to own in order to live their best life and make things happen. It's time to hear that from you. What's your awkward?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always been, you know, kind of an awkward individual, which really came out, you know, through high school and then through college, and then especially in law school, moving to a brand new city all on my own. You know, I've always been a very individual sort of person, kind of keeping to myself. And in law school, I did kind of have to lean into that, because you do have to focus so much on studying to get through law school. And so that really allowed me lean into just being on my own, being individualistic, and just kind of taking ownership of being this sort of, lone wolf kind of person, which, it really lets me focus on my book, on my writing, and allows me to, get through my schooling and then still have time to, do the hobbies that I love, which include writing. So just really leaning into who I've always been, this kind of, individual person, to really become who I feel I was always meant to be, which is, a writer. So yeah, kind of taking ownership of that awkwardness of not necessarily being an incredibly social person, which I do love socializing, but at the end of the day, I would really just prefer to, stay in, have like a nice quiet weekend, and just do some writing.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to me that what you say for your awkwardness was that isolation and being alone, and that was something you were working on in school over the last 4 years. And it sounds like you really ramped that up, like in pandemic, to be forced into isolation and to write a book that turned out to be that the stories you were focusing on were about the isolation. To me, what's the interesting dichotomy there is that you're making the horror about being in a city under isolation, yet that's kind of where you thrive, if I hear that right.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, being imposed in isolation is definitely a completely different feeling than choosing to, to stay in on, a Friday night. It's definitely a different feeling, but at the end of the day, I would still choose to just, stay in. And the book definitely let me explore those different, facets of isolation, because there are characters in Salem Avenue that definitely prefer to be alone. And something that I really noticed was all of my characters are kind of alone, throughout. They don't have a lot of dialogue with other characters. The point of view is very much just from one individual character. And there are benefits from that, as you'll see in the story, and there are eventually, tragic endings to a lot of that. And that's definitely something that I've had to reflect on in my own life. Being alone forever is not a good idea. Right. I don't think that's something that I would enjoy, long term, especially through the pandemic. That's definitely something, I have missed going out. So it's definitely allowed me to reflect on, that sort of isolation that I do enjoy and thrive in. But also at the end of the day, I do need to get back out into the world and, rejoin society.
Yeah, I think that everybody learned during the pandemic that there is a sliding scale for your level of introvertedness.
Exactly.
Like, I may have a little bit of extrovert in me more than I wanted to admit when you all of a sudden can't be out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned a lot of the characters are more isolated. Do you feel that any particular characters represent you? Are there any?
Oh, absolutely. So the title story, Salem Avenue, that actually comes from a street name in my hometown, Hagerstown. Salem Avenue is one of the main streets that runs, along leading into the city and runs through the city. So I always loved that street name. And when it came to write a story, I very much, got inspired by my childhood living in Hagerstown. And that's where the story takes place, in an alternate fictionalized Hagerstown called Hager's Fancy. And so the main character of that, Elba Reed, she very much embodies a sort of, obviously it's very much dramatized, and I've made it much more worse than, real, like Hagerstown actually is. But I definitely took a lot of inspiration from that sort of mindset of just being on your own and, kind of trying to thrive within that, but also wanting something more.
Yeah, and they do say that you need to write what you know about or what you've experienced, and it just makes it natural. It takes the work out of it when you're.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That's definitely helped, and it lets you to write more authentically. I found, because I've tried writing things that I know nothing about before, but it just comes off as, you're not really writing from something that you know or that you've experienced, and it doesn't come across as truthful. Even if I'm writing something, that is in a scenario that I have not been in, like in the first story, in The Black Spot, where when it comes to like the feeling of like a crushing weight of isolation, I have to go and I have to put myself in like a corner of a room or like in a like darkened closet to kind of get, as accurate of a depiction of that very specific image, because I am a very visual writer. I use a lot of imagery and metaphors and similes, so to get the most accurate, sort of depiction of that feeling as I can get is something that I love to do, is really put myself in as much of a situation as I can.
That makes sense. I hadn't thought about that from a writing perspective, because the writing that I do is either specifically about a situation I was in, or it's not visual. So I hadn't thought about having to create the visual when you're creating fiction or a story where you're like, wait, what would this look like? But when you were describing that, it just was reminding me of how when Walt Disney was creating some of the first pictures with like Bambi and stuff, and they would bring animals in and actually have the animators look at how they act and move.
Right. And even if that's not necessarily, something that's vital to the work at the end of the day, it adds so much more depth and realism, and it allows the reader to connect in such a more visceral way than they would have otherwise if you didn't, put in that extra effort to really experience and be able to convey what's going on in the story.
Exactly. So you mentioned that you had to learn to lean into it. Was there a moment where you became very aware of that being a need?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So, so my first year in law school, I definitely tried to be more social. I had just moved to the city. I was looking to make all new friends. But I really ended up struggling with my schoolwork the first year of law school, which is the hardest one. And a lot of the people that I ended up, hanging out with, they turned out to be, pretty fake people. So and that's the risk that you take when you go out and try to socialize with all new people. You don't know them very well, especially in the city. Cities are cutthroat, right. Yeah. Especially in law school. So I definitely realized at the end of the day, it's going to be better for me to stick with, limiting the opportunities for me to kind of fall into, those social traps where you're like out drinking, every Friday night, or you kind of let your schoolwork, fall by the wayside a little bit. So I really realized, okay, I have to just focus on me and focus on what's good for me and what's best for me to do to accomplish my goals, which at the end of the day are the most important thing to me, are what I want to accomplish in life. And that isn't, necessarily making as many friends as possible. It's, getting these books out, getting my book written, which I did end up accomplishing. And a lot of that was definitely, choosing, all right, this weekend I'm going to stay inside. I'm going to, just sit down at my computer. I'm just going to type all night long and get as much written as possible. And that's really what I needed to get done. And I achieved that, which is a great feeling. And it's really confirmation that, okay, this awkwardness is something that I really needed to lean into and just really, really needed to explore and just let that kind of be the way that I, become myself.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's very freeing when you start to see yourself get closer to your goal and you realize that you can make that choice, right? It's not I have to sit at home and I can't go out with friends. But when it's a choice that you are saying, you know what, this is more important to me, and I'm following this course because this is where I want my life to go, it gives you that power to say, this is the life I'm creating. But over 4 years, I mean, was it like, oh, I'm leaning into the isolation and now I'm good, so I'm happy at home all the time? Or were there moments where you're like, is this going to come together or what?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So when I first started writing it, it was the final year of my undergrad, and I was taking a horror fiction class, which kind of really opened my eyes to what horror can be. And so I had these ideas, and I would sometimes I would sit down and start writing it. And I mean, at that point, it's so far off that you just think there's no way that I'll ever end up finishing this. I mean, the book is 83,000 words. And wow. Yeah, and when you sit down and type a page that's maybe 250 words long, you're like, you start thinking this is going to be 10 years into the future. There's no way I'm going to finish this anytime soon. And then you kind of start to lose sight of, why am I doing this? What's the point of this? So then, I mean, especially when the pandemic hit and I was already in the Georgetown program at that point, everything just kind of lined up. It's like, all right, I have to be at home anyway. There is no going out. I've got an end goal here with this program where, I have a due date. I have to get this done by this time or it's not going to happen at all. So that really helped me to just, lean into just, okay, I need to be isolated right now. This is what needs to happen. There's no choice about it. And so it's just going to get done. And right. that's eventually the mindset that you have to have. I'm going to do this and I'm just going to get it done. And that's what's going to happen.
So how do you how do you get to that mindset if you're not there? Like when you're feeling like there's 250 words and I'm trying to get to 88,000 or 83,000, like how do you get over that hurdle? Because that's a huge gap, right? When you think, okay, I need to write 4 times the amount of words I have on this page to get to 1,000, and I need to multiply that times 88. Is there a trick that or something that worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is definitely just the time that passes. I mean, breaking it down definitely helps. I wasn't just sitting down and writing one long novel. It was broken down into different short stories. I mean, there's still like thousands of words each. So getting it broken down into nice sections and then breaking down each story into chapter length. And I mean, the first story is like a diary entry, so it's like broken down by date. It's like, okay, finish the entry for this date and then this date, and just set yourself little goals along the way. And then once you complete each goal, you're like, okay, I've made progress here. I've made progress here. And then once you finish your first story, you're like, I've got a big chunk of this already out of the way. I've gotten that done. Now I can move on to the next one and just take it in little increments that are manageable, so that when you finish each one, you do feel a sense of accomplishment instead of setting out to complete. When you sit down, you're not thinking, okay, I'll have this done. I'll have this whole book finished by the end of the week, because that's just not going to happen. So you just have to set smaller incremental goals that you can finish along the way.
Yeah. And I like how you say to break it down into goals, to smaller goals, because I think that's where we get overwhelmed, is when we're so focused on that cover to cover book that it's like, I don't even know where to start. You said you were, you kind of came to that realization when pandemic started that you had a deadline you had to get to, and it's just buckle down and get this done. It's now or never. Was there a point where you really hit your stride, whether it was with the book or with studying, where you realized that this isolation works for you?
Yeah, so I think it was really when I got the theme down of, okay, I'm going to look at this book as kind of an examination of a city in isolation, and the city as the source of the horror in the book, because that really bleeds through every single story. And so when I got the idea of, okay, I need to always be coming back to this theme and this idea of isolation and urban decay and the city as kind of one of the main antagonists, that really helped me to focus, okay, this is where each story is going to go. It kind of gave me a roadmap. And even while I was in the weeds of actually writing, it allowed me to really color the story with more metaphors and more similes that really take aim at the city as that big, massive source of horror. So that really helped me to just focus and just kind of get the idea of, okay, this is where the book is going. This is the main thesis of the book. This is kind of the trajectory of each story. So that definitely helped, having a theme in mind for the entire work.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that is hard to do, at least from my perspective, when you're putting a collection of stories together, to somehow have it come together as a book where it's, okay, what is the theme? What is the constant stream through the whole work, so that we don't lose the reader or have them confused about, am I reading about, one style or another? So.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing that did help is I made sure to keep all the stories kind of within this shared universe. So they do reference each other. There are kind of Easter eggs all throughout each of the stories that refer back to each of the other ones. And the black spot, the black mold, that's another sort of main antagonist throughout each of the stories. So that pops up in each one of them as a main, driving force of horror throughout the collection. And it really represents that feeling of isolation and decay. That's kind of the embodiment in the story, along with the city as like the imposing setting that kind of creates the opportunity for all of this horror. The black mold that kind of seeps through, the pavement cracks and kind of creeps along the sidewalks and into each apartment building. That's really the embodiment of that feeling of just this oppressive isolation. So that also really helped to kind of unite all of the stories and the collection as a whole.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I should not read this book before I go to bed. I can see myself just be like, okay, now I'm gonna have bad dreams.
Yeah, no, and I definitely had bad dreams, writing it, because it's, spending so much time in this world that I've created with this, and I hate mold anyway, which is really why I chose it.
It's the ultimate enemy.
Oh, exactly. Anytime I see like mold on food, I just gotta throw it away. I can't touch it. I can't look at it. So just the idea of that everywhere in this world, it's, I mean, you definitely get affected by it writing it so much and kind of really embodying these characters and putting yourself in these situations. I mean, it's, it's kind of thrilling. I really enjoyed, putting myself kind of in that position where, these horrors, at least to me and to these characters, were very, very real while I was writing it.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point that you bring up, because we hear about actors kind of getting caught up in the character that they're portraying and having to take on the role. But with writers, to me, it's as intense, if not more intense, because it's in your brain. You're having to create it, and you don't step away from it. You don't step off the set.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see calling myself a method writer, very much so. Because I mean, if I needed to evoke a feeling, I would have to go out, and I mean, I wouldn't have to, but to get a more authentic, idea of what I'm going for in the story. If I need to, walk down a street that's maybe not, in the best part of town to really get this idea of the city, it's a much more visceral writing experience. The kind of imagining, oh, like, what does a bad part of town look like? What have I seen in movies before? What have I seen on the news? It's very different than putting yourself in that situation and kind of feeling all of the feelings as you're going through. It really lets you, create a character that feels so much more real and that you can connect with. I mean, I connect with all of these characters so much, kind of because I have, in a way, gone through what they're all going through. It's such an incredible experience, kind of getting the opportunity to write something like that.
Yeah. And are you okay and healed after that experience?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's a traumatic. I hate for you to have like PTSD from writing your own book.
Yeah, no. I mean, I definitely want to sit down and read through it on my own at some point, but I definitely need some time away, I think, from actually getting in there and reading all of the sentences and all of the verbs and the because my word choice is very deliberate. Like it's very intentional. And my editors noticed this too. Like, they didn't want to change anything without consulting me first, because that could throw off the entire meaning of a sentence, and just being buried in it for so long. I need some time away from actually reading it.
Yeah, I have a writing group that we meet every week, and we had kind of slowed that down during pandemic because not everybody was set up on Zoom, and we just started resuming literally our meetings. And I had a guest join us who is a friend of mine who's, I think, is going to join the group, and I suddenly became aware of how the conversation is going when you bring someone else into the fold. And I thought, I wonder if they anticipated how much conversation we could have around one word in a sentence in someone's work, and how much that changes it. Because there was a sentence where someone mentioned here versus there, but at the beginning of the story, they were kind of in present tense in the moment. And then they said, and there I was. I was like, well, you're changing my feeling as a reader. But that deliberate word choice is so important. And when you have 88,000 words to be deliberate with, that takes a lot of time and focus.
Oh, it does. It does. And I'm a pretty slow writer, because I am kind of editing as I'm writing, which is something that I definitely need to, change a little bit, because editing, you have time to edit once it's finished, and then you can go back. But once you're writing it, and once you're in those feelings of actually like experiencing what the character's going through, you want to get it right on the first try, because that's really, the first time that you're kind of figuring out what's going to happen and what's going to happen to these characters. So I'll take all day sometimes just to get one sentence down. Perfect. I mean, maybe not all day, but it can take a long time to get a sentence or a paragraph just right, because word choice is so important, and making sure that tenses are all correct is another big issue.
Sometimes I read back through things, and I'm just reading this page, just looking for tense, just looking for imagery, whatever that thing, because I do the same thing when I write, where I do a lot of editing as I go. And so I feel like, I only wrote a paragraph in the last 2 hours, but it's a very clean, concise paragraph, and it's ready to go.
Right.
But I understand what you're saying about setting it on the shelf for a while, letting the readers read it, it's out there in the world now, and then come back to it later and be like, being able to kind of enjoy the story at that point versus still working on it.
Right. And I'm very much looking forward to that. Like, I haven't really had anybody read through the full thing yet, aside from my editors. So I'm really excited to see what they think. And I am hoping to do a book tour first around DC, just when things open back up. And at that point, I would love to do, different readings and then book signings, and then really delve back into it. But I love discussing it. I love discussing, the behind the scenes stuff, because I haven't really had the opportunity to do that very much. And then once things open back up and I can do readings and book tours and stuff like that, I will be more than happy to dive right back into the language and be more than happy to discuss all of that in great detail.
No, that'll be exciting. We look forward to getting you out here for a book tour around the West Coast. So.
Oh, absolutely.
So we're down to just a little bit of time here. So I got to ask you, what's a tip you can give people on how to own their awkward?
Yeah. I guess really, kind of examine yourself. I think that's what I had to do a lot. Give yourself an opportunity to kind of reflect on who you are, who you want to be, what do you want to accomplish in life? What are your goals? What are your short-term goals? What are your long-term goals? And just kind of look at how best you can kind of use who you are, who you want to be to really become that person. That's something that I really had to do, is kind of, okay, maybe I'm not the most social person, but how can that benefit me? Maybe that's something that's actually good for me. Maybe I don't need to be out all the time. Maybe I don't need to have all of these friends. Maybe I can just have, having a few really good friends is such an underrated thing. Having just a few very, reliable, loyal, good friends that you can talk to every day if you need to. And then have, your work, have something that you're really passionate about on the side that you can, if you're not the most social person, lean into that and then accomplish, a short-term goal that you have or a long-term goal, work towards bettering yourself and really becoming who, you want to be or who you think you really should be. And, if there's an aspect of yourself that might be awkward, that's still who you are. And I think the best thing that you can do is really embrace it and just kind of, use that as a facet of yourself and become you.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, it's all part of the package that's you. And so first we got to know what it is. And I love the idea of just kind of taking that time to examine it. So listeners, go examine yourself and order your copy of Salem Avenue so you can read that in the next couple of weeks here, and give Joe your feedback because he's excited to hear. Give him all your good feedback. Give him the reviews, all that good stuff. Share the love. So Joe, thank you so much for opening up. I could talk about writing for hours because, when it's what you do, it's close to your heart. And I was
absolutely
it's like, oh yeah, and then this and then that. And I'm trying to keep my mouth shut because I want to highlight you as the guest. But I love it. I'm excited. I can't wait to talk more about your process. And I will definitely share with the world once I get my hands on that book, which is in the mail.
Yeah.
I'll have it here. And then I can't wait to be pushing it out there. So
yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And everybody, please be sure to like Joe's pages, click the links below to follow him and give him some love on social media. And of course, as always, enjoy your week and own your awkward. Thank you so much for listening in for today's show. Be sure to visit awkwardcareer.com to continue your journey. And of course, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends so they can find their awkward side and learn how to own it.